So the question now is the 47 traitors of the Republican Party. We have now entered into a major constitutional crisis, yet another one in the U.S., and we have been talking to you about the perspective. Let's put it all in perspective before we even get to the details. We have two bankrupt parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. And the question is, how do we reform this system? Well, of course, we do it programmatically with programmatic ideas, the Wall Street sales tax, the seizing of the Fed to finance a recovery. We need to have an organization. It's getting to be the Tax Wall Street Party and the United Front Against Austerity. We're developing a cadre of leaders who can actually take on this job. But you've also got to have a strategy. And the strategy has a number of elements, right? Don't support austerity measures is number one. But then there's this question, how do you deal with these two existing parties? And we've always been very clear. The Republican Party needs to be eliminated first. And the reason for this is, well, the simplest reason, if you eliminate the Democratic Party first, you're left with the Republicans, who would then proceed to institute a fascist dictatorship from which it would be almost impossible to exit. Indeed, the continuing existence of the Republican Party brings with it the threat that if they should ever get the White House, in addition to the Congress, which they now have, in addition to the Supreme Court, which they will have unless and until somebody on there is impeached, Scalia being the most obvious target, impeach Scalia. But if the Republicans ever get control of all of those, they will then proceed to institute, once again, a fascist austerity dictatorship. It will be a permanent fascist austerity dictatorship, and it will come complete with the denial of the vote, the limitation of the franchise. Remember, Scalia says that there is no right to vote under the U.S. Constitution. Isn't that something? You don't have the right to vote, says Scalia, and he's been sitting there for 30 years and nobody's laid a glove on him. And not only the right to vote, if you're black, Hispanic, young, poor, whatever it is, Democrat, anything like that, and then also the destruction of unions. And that's not hypothetical or theoretical. In this past week, the fascist Walker, a presidential contender, thanks to the Koch billions, this is getting to look like Krupp and Thyssen and Ops and the other smokestack barons and bankers who supported Hitler, and Prescott Bush, of course, among them, Harriman, Henry Ford, the Dulles brothers, but so forth. Right now we have Walker up there. The danger is that in addition to having the limitation of the franchise, which is already going forward, even Obama referred to it in Selma last weekend, you've also got the attempted destruction of the unions. And if you do all that, you will have a permanent austerity dictatorship. So it's important to eliminate the Republican Party first. After that, you can proceed, and really this would happen almost physiologically. The Democratic Party would tend to split into two camps. The majority Wall Street Democrats, we've gone through before who they are, you know who they are. And on the other hand, the minority, that would be the New Deal, pro-labor, actual populists. Today, somebody like Elizabeth Warren can pretend to be a leader of that group, but of course she has absolutely no programmatic content. What does she stand for? She doesn't like Wall Street banks. What does that mean? She won't invite them to the state dinners at the White House? Doesn't mean anything. We want to see program, not vague generalities, not gestures or symbolic actions, but mass traction economic demands keyed to the survival needs of working families here in the United States right now today. Not campaign finance reform, not GMO foods, not the Securities and Exchange Commission budget, but mass traction economic demands. Stop foreclosures, free college, refinance student debt at 0%, raise the minimum wage, and above all, the biggest of all, 30 million new productive jobs, permanent ones, and 10 million new entry-level jobs. So that's why we want the Republican Party eliminated first. We're against the entire system, but if you try to do it getting rid of the Democrats first, you will be caught by a fascist dictatorship halfway through the process. By eliminating the Republicans first, you make that fascist dictatorship less likely, and you can then proceed to have the Democratic Party divide, which would be almost spontaneous in that case, right? You can see it right now. The people who are supporting Hillary Clinton and those who are not. That's sort of the breakdown. You can see that quite clearly. Now, the relevance of this has been the following. The Republicans are the more dangerous group at the moment. There's no doubt. The Democratic Party under Obama is, ironically, the lesser evil. And this is becoming more and more clear, even to foreign observers, right? People who thought that Obama was the warmonger in chief. Well, of course, that's a very one-sided, that's a crude distortion. Obama turns out to be the lesser evil compared to some of these warmongers who are running around. But now specifically, the Republicans, as the party of national sabotage, have attempted to bankrupt the United States with a default, right? And that gave the pretext to these predatory lending agencies to downgrade the U.S. debt. We've had two shutdowns of the entire government under Republicano-fascist auspices. We've got the sequester. We're hearing the Pentagon screaming about sequester. More important for us, the National Institutes of Health and research into dread diseases. That has been crippled by this idiotic sequester. And most recently, we had the attempt by the Republicans to hold hostage the funding of the Department of Homeland Security to their xenophobic, racist, anti-foreigner program. And it's wrong on both sides. The immigrants are necessary to build a labor force capable of competing with China. They are the vital raw material that needs to be developed, educated, fostered, made prosperous in order to compete with these quite formidable foreign opponents. And on the other side, the Republicans with that would have had a close brush with extinction. In other words, the Republicans are lurching along the ragged edge of extinction. Again, if they shut down Homeland Security and a major terrorist event erupts, they would be blamed. They would be on the road to extinction. And ironically, I don't wish for such a thing, but if you do the calculus, you'll probably see that something like that might be less catastrophic for the world than a Republican president going to thermonuclear war with Russia over Ukraine, defending a bunch of fascists in Ukraine. So that's not good stuff. So the Republican Party had one brush with extinction with this DHS where they pulled back, and now their second brush comes over the 47 traitors. We've had the 12 tyrants. Now we've got the 47 traitors. Put a hashtag diesis, a sharp in front of that, and you've got a very interesting program. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Let me invite anybody in the New York City area, if you've got time on Saturday afternoon. The protests are moving to Brooklyn, and this is Saturday the 14th, the first day that this program is available. I'm not sure if you're hearing it now, you're going to have any time to get down there, but you might as well know about it. Saturday, the 14th of March, from 1 to 4 p.m. at 625 Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn at an appliance store there. 625 Atlantic Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. So what we're hoping for is that this small demonstration project that goes on from week to week, where are the big organizations? Where's Al Sharpton? Where's Jesse Jackson? Where are the reporters from MSNBC? Where's Chris Hayes, Rachel Maddow, That guy O'Donnell, who comes on late at night, get involved, people. This is where it's at. This is the number one political prisoner, Reverend Edward Pinkney, and we're always at his service whenever he can get through to us. You can hear him right here on World Crisis Radio. So the constitutional crisis after the default, almost, the shutdowns, two of them, the sequester, it's a killer, the DHS debacle, the xenophobic fascistoid program, right, driving away precisely the people you're going to need to compete in the 21st century. And then, of course, the Netanyahu appearance, right, the insolence and the impudence. I would have recommended that did recommend that the United States pull back the ambassador from Tel Aviv and have consultations as a symptom of the extreme irritation that Netanyahu is committing unfriendly acts. Unfriendly acts, that's a loaded diplomatic term. Because what Bibi is preaching, Bibi is saying, there's going to be a war with Iran. Either you, U.S., attack them, or I, Netanyahu, will attack them. So he's essentially trying to drag the American people into war. There would have been time when that would have led to a diplomatic furor, right? There were such attacks on foreign leaders in the past. But we've got the party of the foreigner, the Republican Party, the party of tax evaders, the party of Chinese speculators, the party, of course, of the Koch brothers. They're the ones who provide a lot of the oomph. But we don't really know who owns the Republicans, right? Thanks to their Scalia's Citizens United. One of the effects of Citizens United is you don't know what foreigner owns your government. That can be the British banks, the people who got bailed out by the Fed. Maybe that's why they got bailed out by the Fed. We simply do not know. So the point is, impeach Scalia and down with the 47 traitors. Now, you know this letter, right? This is Tom Cotton. We noticed that Tom Cotton came up sort of paired with Ben Sasse in Nebraska. The idea here, of course, being, if we look back to other exercises of this type, we know that Jimmy Carter, when the Trilaterals brought up Jimmy Carter, they had a spare. That was Reuben Askew, governor of Florida, so we could say that Askew was the spare Carter. We had thought that Cotton was the spare Sasse, but now Sasse may be the spare Cotton. Right? Cotton shows himself to be a fanatical, reckless leader, kamikaze chief, and he has now focused attention on himself in this way, right? So that's the Republican Party. The Republican Party is now spawning kamikaze lunatics of the caliber of Cotton. So the idea being they write to the Iranian government in very crude terms and say, guess what? Any deal you make, we will sabotage. The Congress can sabotage it, and a future Republican president will sabotage it, meaning war. So there's another good reason not to have a Republican president. And it's a good reason to get somebody that's not Hillary Clinton to be the nominee. Because, of course, Hillary Clinton can hardly say, you're a warmonger and I represent peace, because she doesn't. She's a neocon warmonger, and she's got that woman complex going where she's got to be the biggest warmonger in the room. Otherwise, she feels insecure, and she joins hands with Jeb Bush. So this is all terrible. So the point is the 47 traitors have now said that a peaceful solution is impossible. Now, we just want to follow this a little bit more. The idea of this now is, since we have to note in passing that most international agreements are not treaties, right? The treaties that have been ratified with some public attention in recent decades, the NATO treaty in the late 40s was, of course, one. The certain arms control treaties of the 80s, even into the 90s, were of some importance. NATO expansion was, I guess, ratified by the Senate, but without much public attention. In other words, the Eastern Europeans came in under Clinton, and then the Baltics came in under Mad Dog Bush the Younger. But suppose now you look at the 2/3 of international accords that are in the form of executive agreements. Now, first thing is, if the 47 traders block U.S. diplomacy, it means you can't have a peaceful solution to anything, because you can't get it through the Senate. It's clear. They're going to sabotage it. You can't do it as a treaty. You'd like to do it as an executive agreement, and they're telling you now, we're going to overthrow it. Now, anybody ought to be able to see, if you make a peaceful solution impossible, you're choosing war. If you can't make peace, you're going to get war. The only way to prevent some of these disputes from ballooning into needless wars, including needless world wars, is to be able to get things done and get them approved. Case in point, when in late summer 1940, the British found that they were going to go under as a result of submarine attacks in the North Atlantic by the German U-boats, they turned to Franklin D. Roosevelt and said, look, we need destroyers. We need anti-submarine warfare. The British, of course, had been building battleships because they thought they'd dominate the world that way. They didn't want to build anti-submarine warfare. How interesting. It backfired on them. But Roosevelt was not going to make a debater's point. He had to save the British from going under as a result of their own folly. So here we get the destroyers for bases deal. 50 World War I destroyers plus 20 Coast Guard cutters of a more modern type were given over to the Royal Navy of Great Britain to prevent the Britain from going under. The U.S. in exchange got bases all around the British Caribbean to defend the Panama Canal. That was an executive agreement, and that's how it has to be done sometimes when it's got to be quick. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Make sure you keep up with Tarpley.net. Tarpley.net. It's all there, including Webster G. Tarpley Twitter service. And that Twitter service is, I think, absolutely essential because you got to keep up with things at least day by day, and hour by hour is better. So conceptual framework in this Friday broadcast and related articles, but at the same time, get it on Tarpley.net. I did two commentaries for Press TV of Iran this week. We have at least one of them to post, so I hope that will prove possible. Check it out on Tarpley.net. Now, concerning the 47 traders, the first thing is, if you can't make a peace deal, then the result is likely to be war. How about this one? If 2/3 or 3/4 of the U.S. international agreements are in the form of executive agreements, this 47 traders letter essentially says we're going to overthrow all of those. We're going to go through them, and we're going to smash up the ones we don't like. That is chaos, international anarchy. We've seen how the Republican Party of sabotage attacks civilization as we've achieved it, defaults, government shutdowns, sequesters, shut down the police, open the door to God knows what, mayhem, right? There are enemies out there, right? There are false flags, but there are also real enemies. So that's what they essentially want to do. And this, of course, it's essentially the destruction of government. So we've had domestic anarchy from the Republican Party of sabotage, and now to that they are adding international anarchy, international chaos, because the U.S. alliance system is the bedrock of the international reality for much of the world. Not all, but much of the world, right? Europe, Japan, Oceania, all these places. Okay. Now, also, the other thing is how stupid they are, right? I have to laugh at this. If I'm an Iranian hardliner, I can now say, well, I'm off the hook because I can sabotage this thing, and I know that the U.S. will be blamed. Isn't that funny? It's what they deserve, right? Because of their stupidity. These are the Mayberry Machiavellis, right? The redneck diplomats. It's ridiculous. So you're essentially, it's an engraved invitation to any Iranian hardliner that wants to raise his head to say, we can sabotage this. And again, if you don't get a deal, it makes war more likely. This is a bad thing. You want to have a deal. We want to finesse, paper over, solve, get this off the screen, get it off the table, and try to move on to something more realistic. Now, the other one is, how about the other powers, right? Because these Republicans persist in regarding this, as Netanyahu presented it, as something that's just between the U.S. and Iran. Wait a minute. There are some important pieces of territory that somehow don't fit in with this, right? There's some place called Russia, China, and then, the British, France, Germany, countries of some note. You ought to take a look at them. They're cotton. So there are these places, and they're part of the negotiation too. So whatever is forthcoming, if anything is at this point, after all the sabotage, that will be with the imprimatur of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, plus Germany. Well, that's going to go right through the UN Security Council, and the Republicans are going to be left isolated in the world with their insane, anarchistic, Koch-inspired lunacy. I think one of the reasons they do crazy things is because they're living on Koch money. They don't really feel that they have to appeal to a broader part of the electorate, as indeed they cannot. So they essentially say, well, if this is what Koch likes, run it by Koch, and if so, then if Koch likes it, then we're going to do it. Now, since this is obvious to the others, right? China, Russia, Britain, France, Germany. Suppose this all fails, the sanctions regime is going to fall apart. Now, that I would certainly welcome. I'm against economic warfare in all of its forms. Take a look at my book, Surviving the Cataclysm, 1999, second edition, 2009. Take a look in there and you'll see I call for the ending of all embargoes, economic warfare, sanctions. Sometimes it can be applied. They can be applied to military goods, especially exotic weapons and so forth. But other than that, all the normal stuff, any other kind of civilian product, and don't tell me about dual use, these should not be allowed to persist. And they won't persist because now that the U.S. 47 traitors have shot their mouths off, 47 bunglers, 47 anarchists, whatever they are, they've now made themselves a laughingstock. But now anybody can say, look, it's impossible to work with the U.S. They have this lunatic majority now in the Congress, and it just won't work. Now, some of the Republicans are getting scared what they've done, because this is probably one of 5 different pieces of idiotic sabotage they do on any given day. And the Republicans, some of them are trying to say that, oh, well, you win a few, you lose a few. That's McCain, right? McCain says, well, maybe this wasn't exactly the best way to carry this out, right? Maybe that's something rather foolish that we've done. Yeah, it's obviously so. So you imagine if McCain started World War III, I can imagine a cartoon of McCain. The missiles are going to come down. The missiles are going up, and the other missiles are going to come down. And McCain is there saying, "Whoops, that wasn't the right way to do it, huh?" Here it is. Maybe that wasn't exactly the best way to do that, says McCain to Fox News on Tuesday, taken up again in the editorial of the New York Times yesterday, the 12th of March, as I believe. Whoops. Now, there's also the fraternity prank. I would suggest that you go to the writings of Nietzsche on the blonde beast. The blonde beast. And how, for the blonde beast, this was George Bush the Younger, certainly, to kill people can be seen as a fraternity prank. Ein Studentenstreich, in the words of Nietzsche. nature, right? Fraternity prank. You kill a few people. It's just boys will be boys. So in this frame of mind, we have, I think it's the Daily Beast. The Times of Israel, anyway, has a good synthesis. The Times of Israel says that there are certain Republican Senate aides who are trying to laugh it off. Quote, 2 Republican congressional aides in an article published Tuesday described the 47 Traitors letter as cheeky, while others said that the note was a lighthearted attempt at asserting congressional power vis-a-vis the high-stakes talks over a nuclear agreement with Iran. The administration, one of them says, the administration has no sense of humor when it comes to how weakly they have been handling these negotiations, said a senior Republican aide. So this humor is apparently lost on most capitals in the world, who somehow don't start laughing as they contemplate a war in the Middle East. And how about your kids? Do you have children, grandchildren? Are they supposed to have a life under these lunatics? The Republicans have got to go. And one in particular, the one who maybe dupes more people that might eventually come into this broadcast. That would be little Rand Paul. We'll get him in just a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Now, the American people are not amused either by the World War III clowning of the 47 traitors. Again, if you don't have a peace deal, the chances of a general Middle East war increase. And that's bad. And you don't know how far that will go. Remember Anne-Marie Slaughter of the State Department and Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton has said, yeah, you want to bomb Syria because that's a place where you can defeat Putin, right? You can kill some Russians and humiliate Putin that way. This is absolute insanity. You're playing Russian roulette with a terrible, terrible situation. So we're not amused. Now, how is this expressed? First of all, there is a petition at the White House site which wants the prosecution of the 47 traitors for, you name it, high treason. How about that? I think you could make a pretty good case. Giving aid and comfort to enemies, this is an overt act. The enemies are not the usual ones, but I'm sure we can identify them. And the other one is the Logan Act of 1799. In other words, that this Senate is usurping the power of the executive branch, and they are masquerading as the current State Department when they're talking about a future one. So more than 200,000. And the Obama regime will have to answer, even though I'm sure they'll answer in some mumbling, namby-pamby way. If Eric Holder is such a fire eater, I want to see Eric Holder, who is now leaving, he has nothing to lose, indict a couple of those senators. Indict Cotton, and put the fear of God into these people, right? They are subversives. A lot of them are susceptible to prosecution under the Smith Act. A lot of them have they have advocated the violent overthrow of the U.S. government, like the hog castrator there, Joni from Iowa. But then we have the voice of New York City, and this is a day to remember, a week to remember. The New York Daily News. It's a tabloid, of course. It's actually the largest tabloid in the U.S. It's the 5th largest newspaper. The other ones are all things like Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and USA Today, and so forth, and I think Los Angeles Times, who are bigger. This is the biggest tabloid. It's still more than 500,000 copies a day. And the headline is, Traitors! Yes, indeed, traitors! GOPers try to sabotage BAM nuke deal. Now, BAM, of course, for the people not familiar with the ways of the Big Apple, the BAM is Obama, right? Hill was Hillary. BAM is Obama. So they're trying to sabotage BAM. And who do we have? We have the face of Mitch McConnell, always horrendous, Schrecklichkeit. We have Ted Cruz. We have Tom Cotton. And we have little Rand Paul. They're sending a warning letter to Iran. They say the pact may be overturned, and the Dems are saying stunt risks a war. And that is the honest truth. This stunt does risk war. Again, for the simple reason that if you can't make a peace deal, you're at the mercy of whatever winds may drive you in the direction of war. So when the Europeans complained to McCain, he said, I don't care about you. You're a bunch of Neville Chamberlains. In other words, you're not a crazed warmonger like John McCain, right, who starts a war and then says, oh, maybe that wasn't the best way to do it. Whoops. Or Lindsey Graham. He says, I don't care what Germany wants. They're not standing up to Putin. They haven't started such a situation. Now, what we're seeing is a cultural crisis of the U.S. Elite. I would also point out that Lindsey Graham and Netanyahu are getting a lot of play here in Washington. Maybe you don't know it out there in the rest of the world, but here in Washington, there has been a huge advertising campaign by, let's see if I'm going to remember the organization. I doubt that I will, maybe later on in the show. But what you see, it's called The Delivery, right? And it looks like some kind of a truck, sort of subcontracting for DHL or FedEx or whatever it is. It's a white van, and it's coming through the streets of Washington and stops for a pedestrian, almost gets into trouble with that. And it drives into a parking garage, and it's parked out on the roof in the middle of Washington, D.C. And we've been hearing Lindsey Graham warning, and then Netanyahu intoning his warning, and then the nuclear bomb goes off. So it's the sum of all fears translated into Washington, D.C., with the help of Netanyahu and Lindsey Graham. So this hysterical propaganda, right? Absolute fear-mongering, absolute insanity. So what's the remedy? Now, look, we got to delve a little bit into history. We do have a history here in the United States. It is not kind to those who are branded as traitors. You have to remember, in the War of 1812, 200 years ago, we had the Federalist Party, and the Federalist Party had at this point degenerated, right? It doesn't help. It didn't help the Federalists of 1814 that they'd been founded by Washington, run by Hamilton, and then by Adams. No, that's why it won't help the Republicans that they can count Abraham Lincoln and such people. Won't help them because they have now degenerated, right? Lincoln is long gone. The Republicans have flipped over completely. And the point is then, if we go back to 1814, there was the War of 1812, right? The British had burned the Washington. They had attacked Baltimore and been driven off. But by December of 1814, just about 150 years ago, quite recently, they were attacking the U.S., and the New England Federalists decided that they would break out of this, that they would start making their own foreign policy, Their own foreign policy. Let's see what we get. During the dark days of 1814, commercial New England's loyalty to the Union was put to a severe test. There were British attacks and so forth. The legislature of Massachusetts, Federalists, voted to call a convention to meet at Hartford, Connecticut, for the purpose of giving voice to New England opinion, meaning treason and secessionism. The convention met on December 15th. They did reject narrowly a plan that savored of secessionism, but they condemned the multiplied abuses of past administrations and acts of Congress in violation of the Constitution. Isn't it amazing that when secessionism and treason come, they wrap themselves in the Constitution? The Hartford Convention maintained the right and duty of a state to interpose its authority in cases of deliberate, dangerous, and palpable infractions of the Constitution. But don't overdo it. You can't fly into open rebellion on every single one. Now, The war ended. Prosperity returned to New England. The proponents of the Hartford Convention soon became eager to forget what they had done, Republicans, but since the convention had been primarily the work of Federalists, the Republicans, meaning the other party, were able, not the Republicans of today, the Democratic Republic, sort of the Jeffersons, right, the Democrats, were able to charge the party of Washington and Adams with treason and virtually to force it from the political scene. The Federalist Party was destroyed as a result of treason expressed in the Hartford Convention. And I haven't done an exhaustive check, but I would say that's certainly one of the leading examples of what happens in American politics when you become the party of treason and the party of sabotage. So it is the duty of every right-thinking person anywhere you are in the world to help the Republican Party down this path to its ultimate extinction and liquidation. And then we'll get on with splitting the Democrats.